Suzuki has a long heritage in SUV-style vehicles of all kinds, but hasn't been at the forefront of the latest fashionable trend for so-called crossovers, cars that bring a little extra lifestyle and practicality to the kind of ordinary family hatchback that many buyers with children would otherwise have to have. With this SX4 S-Cross, the company aims to put itself back into play, this car larger and better suited to current buying trends than its rarely seen predecessor. There's certainly a place for it in the Qashqai class, but is it worth a place in your garage?
Suzuki's SX4 S-Cross. This is where the brand gets serious about crossovers. Think of cars in this segment. Family hatches with extra space and SUV attitude. And you don't tend to think of Suzuki, which must be frustrating for the Japanese brand given that their initial entrant in this sector, the Mark I SX4 of 2006, actually predated the original Nissan Qashqai that most people think pioneered this class of car. That first generation SX4 was a little too small, a little too shy and retiring, and a little too poorly promoted to set the sales charts alight the way its Nissan competitor did. But Suzuki has watched, learned, and come back fighting. This SX4 S-Cross is a much more competitive proposition. It's certainly helped that the design this time round is all Suzuki's own. The original SX4 was developed in conjunction with Fiat, who badge engineered their own version and probably compromised the end result. This time round, the Japanese maker was free to think bigger, not only when it came to this car's size, but also in terms of efficiency and technology. As a result, they now call this the crossover that's perfect for families without being just a family car. But what exactly does that mean? We're going to find out. If, like me, you're a little tired of crossover models of this kind being promoted as sporty, then you might find this S-Cross to be refreshing in its sensible, family-orientated approach to vehicle dynamics. Suzuki knows how to do sporty. I'm well aware of that, having just spent an enjoyable week at the wheel of a Swift Sport hot hatch, whose 1.6 litre 120 PS petrol engine this car shares. But the company also knows that a higher riding vehicle that must offer a more absorbent ride and a modicum of off-road prowess can never be made to properly handle like a sporting car. More to the point, I'm not sure why, as an owner, you'd ever really want it to. What you will need are safe, predictable responses, feelsome steering, plenty of pulling power, and suspension able to soak away the worst tarmac scars you'll encounter in the urban jungle that represents this car's preferred natural habitat. All of which the S-Cross can deliver, though I would insert a caveat in that statement when it comes to engines. For the pulling power part of the equation, you have to pay the premium for the DDIS diesel engine, a Fiat-sourced unit that offers double the torque of the petrol power plant that I've just mentioned. 320 newton meters as opposed to just 156 newton meters. That's a massive difference, and it's a pity because otherwise the petrol engine is a pleasant little power plant. Its rest to 62 mph sprint time of 11 seconds, actually a second quicker than its black pump fueled stablemate. Otherwise, the two units are actually quite similar, both 1.6 litres in size with a 120 PS output. If you don't tow, drive off-road or undertake many long journeys, the petrol version will probably suit quite well. Otherwise, I'd probably want to stretch to the diesel I'm trying here. It really does pull like a train, enabling a brake towing capacity of 1,500 kilograms, up from the 1,200 kilograms the petrol version manages. Even if you're never planning to hitch up, there are times when you'll really notice the extra grunt this engine produces, say when you're overtaking. Stay in fourth gear, for example, accelerating from 30 to 70 miles an hour, and you'll get there around 3 seconds quicker than you would in a directly comparable 1.7 litre diesel Kia Sportage. If you do choose the DDIS model, you'll have to accept manual transmission, so it's just as well that what's provided is a reasonably slick 6-speed box. For some reason, the CVT automatic option is limited to petrol models that in manual form get a 5-speeder as standard. Urban folk will want to look at the CVT, and it's with them in mind that Suzuki has set up this car to ride fairly softly. True, the ride isn't quite the equal of Nissan's Qashqai class favourite, but maybe that's a compromise worth making, as the S-Cross has the measure of its Japanese rival when it comes to body control on more challenging roads where the car corners crisply. Though two-wheel drive models sometimes lack a bit of traction out of slow corners, something that has certainly been helped during the colder months by the fitment of winter tyres. That's not an issue you'll be troubled with if you pay the premium for all-grip four-wheel drive. Now, this isn't the permanent layout provided on Suzuki's Grand Vitara SUV, but the same lighter part-time setup that was provided on the previous SX4 model, using an electronically controlled clutch pack that distributes drive between front and rear under orders from a 4-position switch beside the handbrake. As with most such systems, this one will leave you in front-wheel drive most of the time, unless a lack of traction is detected, in which case the rear wheels will be dialed in. That's what happens if you leave the whole thing in its set and forget auto mode. There are 3 other options though. Sport is meant for more spirited driving, and in this mode up to 20% of torque is diverted to the rear wheels for livelier handling. Which leaves us with the 2 options intended for the kind of off-road use this car will very rarely see, primarily thanks to restricted ground clearance that can be as little as 165mm on a plush variant like this one. First, there's the snow setting. Its name a bit misleading, as this is actually a mode intended for all kinds of slippery, muddy conditions. Here, the system will stay in four-wheel drive all the time, constantly varying the power split front and rear depending on the conditions. That'll be ideal the next time you have to venture out on an icy, frozen morning. Finally, there's the lock setting, which splits the torque equally front to rear to give you the maximum chance of extricating your S-Cross from somewhere you probably shouldn't have ventured to in the first place. This S-Cross model may not be quite as eye-catching as the Motor Show concept car that gave it its name, but it's still better aesthetically tuned into the needs of the crossover market than its neatly styled but rather forgettable predecessor. To some extent, that's due to the fact that the SUV part of the styling equation is a little more overt this time around. But it's probably mostly because, though still compact, this car is now a size bigger than before, leaving commentators like me with the headache of whether to classify it as a super mini base model, like a Ford EcoSport or a Vauxhall Mokka, or a family hatch-sized Qashqai class example of the breed. Family customers less concerned with segment semantics will probably simply recognise in this car the Qashqai they liked the look of but found they couldn't really afford. This Suzuki does, after all, deliver nearly all of what you get in that car, as long as you like the way it looks. Is this quite as eye-catching as Nissan's class favourite? Perhaps not, but there's little here to offend. The huge headlamps and gentle curves intended to convey a sense of strength and solidity. That's something further emphasised by modulated lines running down the side from the front bumper to the rear combination lamps. The styling's all Suzuki's own this time around, in contrast to the first generation SX4 styled by Italian design house Giugiaro, a car that was originally due to be called the Aereo until that word was discovered as being Grecian for breaking wind. But I'm getting away from the matter at hand, which is just how different this car is from its first generation predecessor. Previous owners, still tempted to doubt that, have only to lift the tailgate and inspect a boot area nearly double the size. About 430 litres, about the same as you get in a Qashqai, and about 20% more than you get in smaller crossovers, Mokkas, EcoSports, Mini Countrymans, Peugeot 2008s and the like. Of course, it's not big enough for a third seating row. You have to stretch to a bigger, much pricier crossover like a Mitsubishi Outlander or a Hyundai Santa Fe for that. But you can at least make good use of the space available thanks to a neat false floor that rises to reveal hidden storage and can be repositioned. There's also a pair of cubbies behind the wheel arches and shopping bag hooks and a 12-volt power supply. Only if you need more space than the basic boot area provides might the S-Cross disappoint, for pushing forward the split folding rear bench only increases your capacity to 875 litres. That's about half what you get from a rival Peugeot 3008 in that configuration. It does help though that if you position the false boot floor properly, you can get a totally flat load bay. Now you can't increase the basic boot space by sliding the rear bench backwards and forwards, but the backrest does recline in some models. And if you were to put it in the more uncomfortable vertical position, Suzuki says that you'll get another 10 litres more trunk capacity. It's more important to note that you get significantly more room here for legs, elbows and shoulders than you would in a smaller crossover. Knees too, thanks to the careful way that the front seat backs have been moulded. As usual in the Qashqai class, 2 adults will be fine and 3 won't be too uncomfortable at a squash, provided that they're not too tall. Vertically challenged folk will especially struggle if they happen to be seated in a plush variant like this one, equipped with a twin sliding panel panoramic sunroof that eats into ceiling room. So if you're tempted by that and fancy this option, test the back of the car out first. If you can live with a roofline, this sunroof is certainly a nice thing to have, offering one of the largest open apertures in this segment. It's also practical back here. You've got these useful indentations that'll take a full-size bottle in the doors. And up front, well, it's much like the outside really, an inoffensive but quite effective piece of sensible design that's been decently screwed together by the Hungarian factory. There are a few more contoured and padded surfaces than Suzuki has provided in the past, but still nothing that'll especially surprise or delight you, though there are blue ring dials and silver trim around the air vents to try and lift the ambience. There could be a little more cabin storage, the door pockets being shallow and the glove box size limited. Though you do get a reasonably sized bin ahead of the gear lever and a practically sized one just behind the handbrake. At least the switchgear is commendably intuitive, with no button fest to baffle you on first acquaintance. I would recommend that you try to stretch to this infotainment touchscreen, which not only includes the expected satellite navigation setup, but also offers an easier way to access entertainment than the rather fiddly stereo that you get on baseline models. More exalted brands could learn a thing or two from this system's simplicity. Expect to pay somewhere in the £15,000 to £24,000 bracket for your SX4 S-Cross, or to put it another way, a fraction less than the list pricing for most ordinary Focus or Astra-sized family hatches. You can see why so many families would rather have something like this instead. As usual, the major customer choice is the selection between petrol and diesel power, both engines rated at 120 PS. Most buyers will settle for the two-wheel drive variants that the bulk of the S-Cross range is built around. If you do want to sample Suzuki's four-wheel drive expertise, then the all-grip option is offered at an £1,800 premium, on top of the cost of high-spec models. Because you'll only find it towards the summit of the range, you'll need a reasonably plump budget of around £22,000 for 4x4 S-Cross motoring, whichever engine you select. If that doesn't put you off, then it may be a small crumb of comfort that the option of the CVT automatic transmission costs less for all-grip customers, £900 as opposed to £1,300, though for some reason you can only have the self-shifter with the petrol engine. As for rivals, well, assessing the value proposition this car offers is a little awkward, as it sits neatly in the middle of the market's two main crossover classes. Those cars based on super minis like Ford's EcoSport, Vauxhall's Mokka and Peugeot's 2008, and those slightly bigger ones based on family hatchbacks like Nissan's Qashqai, Mazda's CX-5 and Peugeot's 3008. Suzuki contends that with an S-Cross you're getting a car from the larger class for the price of a vehicle from the smaller one, which is pretty much true. If, like most buyers, you're looking around at options based on a restricted budget, then the crossover segment competitors you're most likely to end up comparing to this Suzuki will be the super mini based ones, for cars in the larger Qashqai class may well be beyond your means. We'll get to those in a minute. If that does leave you shopping amongst smaller crossovers, then make sure that you compare like with like. These super mini based designs are often two-wheel drive only and are usually based around much smaller and feebler engines than this Suzuki offers, which is, for example, why Renault's cheaper Capture model isn't really a realistic rival. Those compact contenders offering the option of a bit more grunt, enabling them to properly compare to an S-Cross, include Mitsubishi's ASX, which is similarly priced to this car in petrol form but significantly pricier as a diesel or with four-wheel drive. Then there's Peugeot's 2008 1.6 VTI, which costs a few £100 less than this Suzuki, but like the Mitsubishi is smaller. And Ford's EcoSport 1 litre EcoBoost, also more compact and costing around £1,000 more. In terms of two-wheel drive comparisons, well, I could mention the Mini Countryman 1 and Skoda's Yeti 1.2 TSI, which both cost just over £1,000 more, and Vauxhall's Mokka 1.6 16 valve, that's around £3,000 more. Though, to be fair, all of these three cars also come with four-wheel drive, at which point their prices swing back into line with the kind of money that Suzuki is asking for S-Cross all-grip variants. Bear in mind, though, that if you choose an S-Cross, you'll be getting a slightly bigger car with more rear seat room and about 20% more boot space. If you want to match that with something else from the crossover class and don't want to settle for something really cheap like a Dacia Duster or a Sanyong Corando, then you'll need to shake your piggy bank quite a lot more to get a car from the larger family hatch-based segment that I mentioned earlier. Now, it's a segment pioneered by Nissan's Qashqai, and that model, along with another class favourite, Peugeot's 3008, will cost you around £2,500 more than a comparable S-Cross. That's in two-wheel drive form. Peugeot don't offer four-wheel drive, and Nissan might as well not, given that the cheapest all-wheel driven Qashqai is an exorbitant £26,000. Potentially competitive family crossovers like Ford's Kuga and Mazda's CX-5 carry big premiums too, whichever drive layout you're after, most variants setting you back around £5,000 more than a comparable S-Cross. Even the Koreans can't match Suzuki here, a fact underlined by the way that two-wheel drive versions of crossovers like Kia's Sportage and Hyundai's iX35 are anything between £1,500 to £2,500 more, depending on the model that you're looking at. Only a 2-litre petrol all-wheel drive Sportage can get close to Suzuki's pricing, but that car, like another comparably priced all-wheel drive rival, Subaru's XV, will be vastly more expensive to run. Once you've considered all of that, you may end up concluding that it is an S-Cross that you really need, in which case you'll be wanting to know exactly what's included in terms of standard kit. And the answer is a reasonable amount. All models get alloy wheels of at least 16 inches in size, air conditioning with a pollen filter, cruise control, electric mirrors, an immobiliser, central locking, and a decent quality 4-speaker CD stereo with USB input and steering wheel controls. That's for the base SZ3 model. I'd recommend, though, that you try and find the extra £1,200 that'll get you into SZ4 spec, which is probably the sweet spot in S-Cross ownership in its balance between value and comfort. Here you also get daytime running lights, headlamp levelling, front fog lamps, power folding mirrors, privacy glass, roof rails, Bluetooth phone compatibility, keyless entry and a reclining rear seat. What you don't get is the option of all-grip four-wheel drive, or if you're a diesel customer, the alternative of automatic transmission. For these, you've to take another step up the trim hierarchy, but at least if you can venture that far up the range, you'll get yourself niceties like satellite navigation, leather trim, a rear parking camera and a neat double sliding panoramic sunroof. Safety kit is pretty comprehensive, running to ISOFIX child seat fastenings, a pedestrian-friendly bonnet, a tyre pressure monitoring system, twin front side and curtain airbags, plus a driver's knee bag, though, as with most of the competition, a full-size spare wheel is lacking. Provided you don't choose the base petrol trim, there's also hill hold control to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. Other familiar electronic aids include ESP stability control and ABS brakes with a brake assist function to help in emergency stops. Most S-Cross customers will choose the DDIS diesel engine, and understandably so. It's better to drive and get strong economy. Thanks to features like optimised bodywork and underfloor aerodynamics, along with an auto stop-start system to cut the engine when you don't need it, stuck in traffic or waiting at the lights, Suzuki quotes a figure of 67.2 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle for the front-wheel drive version, along with 110 grams per kilometre of CO2. Now, though not quite as good as a slightly less powerful Nissan Qashqai 1.5 DCI 110, that's still a very good showing, matching Peugeot's 3008 1.6 HDI and easily beating base diesel versions of cars like Hyundai's iX35 and Kia's Sportage. It's also good enough to beat smaller, feebler crossovers like base diesel versions of the Ford EcoSport, Vauxhall Mokka and the Mini Countryman. Of course, if you order your diesel SX4 S-Cross with all-grip four-wheel drive, you'll be expecting the returns to fall a little. Fortunately, the impact isn't too drastic, the figures sliding only marginally to 64.2 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 114 grams per kilometre of CO2. Which looks very good indeed against comparable 4x4 crossover alternatives like Subaru's XV and Jeep's Compass. Choose a petrol-engined version of this Suzuki and you're looking at 51.3 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 127 grams per kilometre of CO2, with only marginal differences if you opt for the CVT automatic gearbox. No other green pump-fueled compact crossover model can beat this, and only Nissan's Qashqai 1.2 DIGT gets close. Most other comparably sized and powered cars in this segment will cost you about 20% more to fuel and will be about the same amount dirtier. Now, choose your petrol-powered S-Cross with all-grip four-wheel drive and the figures fall to 47.8 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 135 grams per kilometre of CO2. But that's still very good by class standards. If you want a point of reference, a comparably performing Mini Cooper All-4 Countryman with the same size 1.6 litre engine delivers 40.9 miles to the gallon and 160 grams per kilometre. So much for minimalism. If you're wondering how Suzuki has managed to produce such an efficient end result, much of the answer lies in weight, or the lack of it. The lightest version weighs just 1,175 kilograms, and even the four-wheel drive all-grip models start at 1,240 kilograms. Now, to put that into perspective, a comparable Nissan Qashqai weighs 1,392 kilos in its lightest form, while a Kia Sportage sits the wrong side of 1.5 tons. In other words, the S-Cross is vastly lighter than its competitors. No wonder such a strong balance sheet showing is easily within its remit, with diesel model returns that'll see you paying just £20 a year in road tax, a fiscal triumph for a car of this size. What else? Service intervals are every 12,500 miles, whichever engine you choose, but unfortunately Suzuki doesn't offer a prepaid servicing pack at time of purchase, so you can't budget ahead in this respect. Insurance, well, you're looking at groupings ranging between 13 to 14 for petrol models and 18 to 20 for the diesels. The warranty is the usual 3-year 60,000 mile affair, and there's a year of pan-European roadside assistance, plus a 12-year perforation warranty. Finally, residual values are forecasted to be acceptable by general class standards, with independent industry experts CAP quoting a retained value figure of 34% over the usual 3-year 60,000 mile period. Having supersized the SX4, Suzuki now has a far more competitive vehicle on its books, and one well equipped to handle the grim realities of modern family life, with its congested school runs, child-centred messiness and weekend visits to ungrateful relatives. If, like me, you live in this world and don't have a lifestyle family, but would rather like a lifestyle car of this kind, then by all means try an S-Cross. I think you'd probably like it. True, the motoring magazines may well tell you of other Qashqai class crossovers they prefer, but inspect the fine print when it comes to comparably sized models, and you'll almost certainly find that all of these will cost you significantly more. An important consideration when you've to feed, clothe and holiday with increasingly demanding offspring. Of course, it's worth stretching up to something better if that something offers a more practical, efficient alternative. The question is, though, whether the rival crossovers that shade this Suzuki in terms of handling, cabin ambience or total luggage space are really worth paying so much more for. Spend some time with an S-Cross and you may well conclude that they aren't. It'd be nice if four-wheel drive was a more affordable option, but then that's an issue with so many cars in this class. More obvious choices than this one, but as I've suggested, not necessarily better for it. So yes, make sure you try this Suzuki if you're shopping in this segment. I'm remembering that marketing strapline, perfect for families without being just a family car. The more I think about it, the more I think that sums this Suzuki up rather well.